Women make up 70% of the healthcare workforce, but only 20% of its leadership. On Her Story, we'll explore the careers of bold and influential women from Silicon Valley to Capitol Hill and learn how they've overcome the odds. This is Her Story, a program where we explore what's beyond the glass ceiling.
Welcome to Her Story. I'm Sandi Fenwick, CEO Emeritus of Boston Children's Hospital. I'm here today with Sherri Oberg, who is the CEO and co-founder of Particles for Humanity. Welcome, Sherri.
Thanks for having me, Sandi.
Well, you are going to hear from Sherri, who is truly a multi-talented, interesting woman leader. And so, Sherri, I'm going to jump right in and say that, frankly, I knew you when. When you were a graduate student getting your MBA at Dartmouth's Tuck School of Business. And boy, have you been on an interesting journey and path since then with so many accomplishments. You have been a venture capitalist. You've been a startup CEO of a number of life science, public and private companies for the last 30 years. And you are currently a board member of a number of organizations. You're a wife and a mother and a world traveler. So, Sherri, I'm sure everyone would love to hear your leadership journey.
Sure. So my career path has always been kind of interesting when I reflect on it. I always have a plan, but these opportunities come along and I tend to, stumble along opportunities that I end up pursuing. But, after, as I mentioned, I was really interested in medicine and I went back to business school to dive in fully, not only to get some skills, but to really learn more about the healthcare industry and figure out where you go through the corporate recruiting process and find a job in the healthcare industry. So that was my game plan. And what happened was my second year in business school, I was living off campus with four other people, 2 guys and 2 girls, and I was chairing this event called Career Expo. And I think that's actually where I met you. You were one of the panelists at Career Expo, and this was in the days before the internet. And if you wanted to learn about different careers, you had to talk to people about them. And so we Tuck was where I went to business school. It was in Hanover, New Hampshire, kind of out of the mainstream of corporate life. So we invited executives from all different industries to come up and speak to us. And I was the chair of this whole event and it organized everything. And on Saturday morning was when the event was, and I had to get in there early to get everything set up. And I'm not a morning person and I was late. And so I borrowed my male housemate's car to drive in and get things going. And as I was driving in, I saw one of the panelists walking to campus. So I pulled over to offer him a ride. And as I pulled over, I looked inside this car that I had borrowed from my male housemate and realized he had taken it to a poker party the night before. And there were so many beer cans and peanuts on the seat that I literally had to get out of the car and load these beer cans and throw them in the back of the car so that the panelist could get in. So, of course, I am mortified, and the panelist thinks that this is hysterical, and he starts asking me what I was interested in doing, after business school, and I told him I was interested in healthcare, and he said, "Have you ever thought about venture capital?" And I said, "I don't even know what venture capital is." And he said, "Well, we're a venture capital firm that's invited in investing in the biotechnology industry that was just getting started." And he said, "Why don't you come to New York and we'll talk about, venture capital and see if this is something that you might be interested in." So I went down to New York. I got a job offer. And then I thought, well, I better figure out if this is a job I want. I should probably go and talk to some other venture capital firms that are, to compare and contrast this offer with other things. And when I sent out my resume and could not even get one interview, I realized, well, this must be a pretty good job. So I jumped at it. And so again, it was a plan. I had a plan, but the opportunity came along and it turned out to be an incredibly interesting job. And I was in, venture capital this was the mid 80s. Venture capital was sort of an early industry and biotech was really early. There was I was there at the time that Biogen and Genentech were just going public. Our firm was the largest shareholder in Biogen, held 2 seats on the board, and they had invested in 13 other companies in the biotech space, all of which were going public. And my job was to run around and talk to the scientists and figure out what they were going to do next and position our firm to invest in these new companies as they got started. So it was just a really a time when anything was possible, and a lot of really interesting technology was getting started. And I was a history major with an MBA, investing in really early stage, highly technical things. So I was on a very steep learning curve, which made it very fun and interesting to me. And I invested in this company that called Neomorphics, which was a fascinating company that was started actually by the head of organ transplantation at Children's Hospital, who was perplexed by the problem that 9 times out of 10, children, he couldn't get children the organ that they needed, and they would die. But if he could get them the donor organ that they needed, 9 times out of 10, they would go on to live a normal, healthy life. So his solution to this problem was to work with Bob Langer at MIT to invent a limitless supply of donor organs outside the body that could be implanted so that no child would ever die on the waiting list. And this was, a really kind of Buck Rogers way, innovative technology. And those were the kinds of things that were getting funded in those days. And so we invested in this company, and I was very excited about it. But my plan of being a venture capitalist and continuing to invest in these exciting technologies was going just great. And I came back from maternity leave with my first child, my daughter, and this company that I was so excited about had fired its CEO, was behind on all of its milestones, had 3 months of cash, and it looked like the whole thing was going to be a write-off. And I decided that I had gotten my partners into this mess, and I better do something to get them out of this mess. So I I started thinking about jumping in as to run the company as CEO. And as I was evaluating it, I remember talking to one of the partners at the venture firm that I was working at, a guy named Ted Dinnersmith, who's just been another wonderful long-term mentor for me. And he said, Sherri, this firm, everybody's seeing lemons and you see lemonade. And he goes, I think you're on to something. But I went to the scientist and because I'm not a scientist, I wanted to make sure the science was sound. And I said, I'm thinking about jumping in as CEO, but before I do, I want to make sure the science is sound. And he goes, Sherri, the science is sound, but you are jumping on the Titanic as it is heading to the bottom of the ocean and trying to turn it around. And I said, really? I said, are you sure the science works? And he said, yes. The problem is, you're never going to convince these investors to change their mind. They're so negative. And I said, I think the problem is we need business leadership and a business plan that can make progress quickly. And if we can achieve that, I think the investors will be okay. And what we did was we had the head of organ transplantation's expertise was in liver. And he was focused on growing livers, which on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the hardest thing that you could imagine growing, a liver was a 12. And from a business perspective, in those days, the market was primarily alcoholics and people that weren't covered by reimbursement. And so there wasn't really big business opportunity. But there was this skunkworks project that was going on in the back of the lab where they were growing cartilage in the forms of noses and ears. And they grew an ear on the back of a mouse, and it ended up on the cover of Time magazine. And Jay Leno picked up on it and was sort of made a joke about putting a Q-tip in the ear on the back of this mouse. And so the lemonade that I saw in this was, I said to the scientists, if you could make ears and and noses, could you make knee replacements, cartilage for knees? Because that's like $1 billion market. And they said, yeah, I think we could do that. So I jumped into the company as CEO, and we had 3 months to see if we could get some data in cartilage. And we found some retired greyhounds who had blown out their cartilage in their knees, and they were lame. And we put cartilage implants in their knees and put them on a treadmill and showed that they went from being lame to being able to run again. And we were able to get that done in 3 months. So that breathed new hope into the venture capitalists. They put in more money, which gave me about a year to go talk to, the bigger companies in the space. And by the end of that year, we had a buyer and an acquirer of the company who bought the company at a price that everybody made a lot of money on. And I discovered that as much as I liked being a venture capitalist, I loved being an entrepreneur. So that's how I transitioned from venture capital to my first CEO role.
And Sherri, you then went on to form another company. Actually, I believe it was in your basement or your garage. And really ran that for really a number of years. And it was such an exciting opportunity, another exciting opportunity. And yet the trials and tribulations of life science are what they are. And you were just, having known you through that phase, you were just truly one of the most determined, inspiring, wonderful leader of that company. Maybe you could talk just a little bit about that and then get us to where you are today.
Sure. So, so that was another one where, I had a plan and then there was an opportunity that came along. So, so after we sold Neomorphics, I found out I was pregnant again. And I had learned that as an entrepreneur, you can't take even a 3-week vacation, let alone a 3-month maternity leave. So I really knew how important that maternity leave was going to be. So I decided instead of doing something right away, I would consult for a year, have the baby, interview with the, for CEO jobs in a venture-backed company, and then start something after maternity leave. So the game plan was to go to a venture-backed company as CEO. And I got 2 offers with, venture-backed companies that had a lot of money already in the bank. And then Bob Langer, who I had worked with at Neomorphics, came to me and he goes, "Sherri, why don't we start a company together?" And I remember going on vacation with my husband and, saying, to try to decide what I was going to do. And I said, I think I want to do this thing with Bob Langer. And my husband said, "Are you crazy? These other companies have, millions of dollars that they've raised in the bank. They've already started. And Bob Langer, you don't even have a company yet." And I said, "Well, if I can't raise millions of dollars, I have no business being a CEO." And I know Bob Langer really well. I worked with him in a situation, when we jumped into Neomorphics with 3 months of cash, that was a very stressful situation. And that you really get to know people when things aren't going well. And he and I got along great. He rolled up his shirt sleeves and worked shoulder to shoulder with me to turn things around, which a lot of big name scientists, when things don't go well, they start trying to separate themselves. Bob dove right in. So I just decided this is somebody that I really enjoyed working with and that he had a lot of big ideas. And so our game plan, again, our plan was to look at him. He's a prolific inventor with thousands of patents. And so we were going to go through his patent portfolio and figure out which opportunity was the one that we were going to work on to start a company around. And we looked and looked, and we couldn't find anything that really had the right mix of what would be required to raise venture capital. And we were starting to get a little frustrated, actually. And all of a sudden, Bob calls me up on the phone. And he goes, "Sherri," and I'm working in the basement of my house, as you referenced. This is all still in the basement. And he said, "Sherri, I just was hired as a consultant, or not as a consultant, but people have asked me to be a consultant to solve this problem where ultrasound is the only imaging procedure that doesn't have a drug or contrast agent that makes it work better. And they have a way of approaching it that they're struggling to find technical success, and they want me to help them with it. Should I help them, or is this something that we might do together? And I'm like, Bob, do not help them with this. This is $1 billion idea, and this is our idea. So again, from a stranger out of nowhere comes this opportunity that was the beginning of an idea that turned out to be a big enough idea that we were able to, over a 20-year period, accomplish amazing things. I mean, we hired an amazing management team, many of whom that went on to become CEOs themselves or members of the National Academies, an amazing board where you were a member, of people that gave me wonderful advice. We invented 3 drugs that went into human clinical trials, one of which went through all phases of the regulatory process in both the United States and Europe. We built a commercial manufacturing facility that passed a FDA inspection. We closed partnerships all over the world and raised $100 million in venture capital. We did an IPO. And it was just an incredible learning journey. Every 6 months, my job completely changed because everything that I had learned became irrelevant because we were on to the next thing. And that made it really fun and exciting for me. And I make it sound like it was a straight line of success because we accomplished all this, but you were on the board. And so, I mean, every success was like 10 failures along the way to get there. And so I get a lot of joy out of reading these inspirational quotes about a big part of moving things forward is being willing to take risks. And one of my favorites is from Winston Churchill, who says, success is moving from failure to failure without loss of enthusiasm. So I think you saw that, we had a lot of setbacks, but we kept at it. And as a result, we kept making progress. And when I interview people for these early stage jobs, all these companies go through this. I saw that in my venture capital life, which is one of the things that kept me energized through the many issues that we came through, is because what I saw as a venture capitalist was what separated the good companies from the bad were the people that would stick with it and not give up. And so when I interview people, I always ask them, do you like roller coaster rides? Because some people really hate that, that feeling, the ups and downs that you have in a roller coaster rides. For me, I get this, adrenaline rush from roller coaster rides where you think you're going to die and then you don't. It's kind of like that in these venture capital backed companies where you hit a bump along the road and you think that's going to be the end of the company, but you pull the team together and you figure out what's a way to get over it, and then you live to see another day. So it's not for everybody, but for me, it's been really fun.
Sherri, I was going to ask you, what do you think were the skills, competencies, or personal attributes? And I think you just went through them. It started with determination in the back. It is clearly about enthusiasm. And it is clearly around tenacity and resilience. And, if those weren't the things you were going to say, it's certainly what I heard and I know of you. And so, I think those are absolutely what has made you the incredible, not only leader, but one who people really want to follow and to be around. And I think that's what's so important about a leader, is that, that determination that keeps pulling people along the path when the rough really starts getting even rougher. So Sherri, as a woman leader, you clearly are a pioneering adventurer, I would call you. What have been some of either the challenges or, in some respects, I would say sometimes difficulties, but sometimes benefits of being a woman? Have there been any instances that you could talk about?
I get asked that question all the time. And, I wish I had something really insightful to say, but I really don't think of myself. I don't think of I tend to not look at the differences that I have as being a woman. I tend to try to find the areas of commonality. And so people always ask me, what's it like to be a woman leader? I don't think that way. I think more in terms of what do I have in common with the people that I'm working with, and whether it's women versus men, or whether it's myself as a business person working with scientists. I try to find the areas that we're all really excited about the technology, and so I try to find that shared interest. Right now I'm working in the global health space, and I'm an American, and I'm working a lot with Africans, and I try to focus on where there are shared interests. There's so many interests that we're so different in many ways, but there's so much in humanity that brings us together. So as a woman leader, I tend to just think about what do I have in common with these other people that I'm working with.
Thank you, Sherri. We've heard so many different stories, and that truly is a theme where people don't tend to really focus on that. You're aware of it. You take advantage of where you can, but you also look for those commonalities. And so, Sherri, you mentioned global health. Could you talk a little bit about this most truly unbelievably impactful company that you are now, again, with Dr. Bob Langer, working with again? So could you talk a little bit about this most recent role that you're playing?
Yeah, well, this is another one where I had a plan and then an opportunity came along. So, after 20 years at AccuSphere, I decided 20 years was a nice round number and it was time to do something different. And so I transitioned the CEO role, and then I went on a sabbatical where I did all kinds of interesting things that I never had time to do. And I was running a public company. I went to Nepal, and I trekked to Mount Everest Base Camp, and I worked on a film about the need to change education that was that ended up premiering at Sundance Film Festival. And during that time, I was sort of unwinding and separating myself from the company, because if you're a founder of a company, your whole life is completely intertwined with that company that you can't think clearly for a while. And so the sabbatical was sort of a good time to sort of clear my headspace and think about what I wanted to do. And so my plan was, I loved running companies. I felt like I had the energy. I wanted to do it again. And so I figured I'll go find a CEO role in a venture-backed company. And so I started interviewing around at a number of companies. And what I realized was, part of what I had thought reflected on during my sabbatical and what I was seeing was, during my sabbatical, I was thinking about how I wanted to do this again, but to me, impact is really important. And I wanted to do something that was going to impact a lot of people. And I also was thinking about how our healthcare system is so focused on the end of life and trying to save people from dying at the end of life rather than keeping them healthy from the beginning. So I was kind of interested in doing something big and keeping people healthy. And I was going through these venture capital backed interviews, and everybody was talking about either end of life, chronic diseases that they were funding, or they were focused on orphan drugs that are designed, super important drugs for a narrow set of people. So for those people, hugely impactful. But since I had been through this before at AccuSphere, I knew how hard it was going to be. I wanted to do something that was going to have an impact on millions of people. So I was not really finding something that was the right fit. And then who comes along but Bob Langer? And he calls me up and he said, Sherri, a few years ago, Bill Gates gave me $1 gazillion to invent a technology to eradicate malnutrition in the developing world. We've invented something really interesting and it works. And now we need somebody to figure out how to get it out of the labs and into the villages that need it most. Do you have any time? And I'm like, time to work with you and Bill Gates on world hunger? Yes, I have time for that. And it just hit exactly what I was thinking about, and that malnutrition, if you can nutrition is something that keeps people healthy from, from day one in utero, nutrition is important. The first 1,000 days of a child's life is super important for setting their whole life history, their whole life future. And so it was hitting what I was interested in keeping people healthy. And malnutrition is something that affects billions of people throughout sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. So it started out as a consulting project, and we started a company about 4 years ago. And our lead product is for vitamin A deficiency, which is a huge problem across, that 250 million children under 5 years old have. It causes 10 million women that are pregnant to go blind every year. It suppresses your immune system. It's a big cause of death in those parts of the world. And what we've done is encapsulated vitamin A, which is very unstable in light and heat and all the climate conditions that you see in Africa. And by encapsulating it, we protect it from all the things that cause it to degrade, and put it in food that people eat widely, like wheat flour and sugar and bouillon, which almost everybody in West Africa eats. And then those foods act like a Trojan horse that when the people eat it, they get the vitamin A. And then that is a strategy for addressing vitamin A deficiency at scale. And we're about a year from commercialization. So it's been a very interesting journey.
Sherri, this is, the company that you're talking about, the impact on children and women, really not just in Africa, but I'm sure that this is a challenge in many, many other parts of the world, is just so incredible. There's so, as I said, I think of you as a pioneering adventurer, and some people might be cautious or afraid of taking on some of the ventures, whether it's the companies professionally that you've led, some of the trips that you've been on, the sabbatical that you took, where people are sometimes afraid of taking a break and doing something that really makes you rethink what you want to do for the next time period. Could you talk a little bit about, how important that was for you to take a break and to go back and reassess? Because you're as excited, enthusiastic, committed as you've ever been. You didn't miss a beat for that time period, but it was a really important thing for you to do.
It is very important, and there's no way that I could have jumped right out of AccuSphere into another role like that in a thoughtful way. I would have just been, continuing to move without really taking the time to reflect. I mean, when you're running a public company that is, in the, high-tech area, you're spending all your time thinking ahead for the company rather than reflecting back on what you're trying to get out of your life. And so that time to reflect really sort of grounded me in a way that helped me sort of choose my spot rather than just jumping from one thing to the next.
Yeah. And Sherri, as you think, as you've talked about path, either as versus opportunity or plus opportunity, because that really has been so much of what we've heard over and over again, is that, everybody has sort of this idea of what they think they're going to do, but it's those incredible opportunities and the people. So it's opportunity and people that if you combine them, they make an incredible difference in where you go and where you end up. Isn't that true?
I think that's definitely true. And, the people part of it, there are some people in my life that just keep I've maintained friendships with, and I keep doing interesting things with. Bob Langer is one. I've now, I've started 3 companies with him. I've pretty much done, ever since I was 31 years old, I've done something with him professionally. You're an example. I started, working with you when I was in my 20s. Ted Dinnersmith was somebody that I recognized, that I mentioned. He was the person who told me that I was seeing lemonade when others were seeing lemons. I was in my 30s. He was the one who got me involved with the film about the need to change education when I was on my sabbatical, and kind of took me along a journey of, thinking deeply about the education space and tying the threads together, everything that I learned, having gone through the education system myself, being a chair, being on the board of trustees at Dartmouth, raising kids through our existing education system, but also being a CEO in an entrepreneurial world and seeing what the skill sets and needs were in an economy that's going to be driven a lot by technology and innovation. The mismatch of what those needs are and what our educational system were producing. So, if it wasn't for TED, I wouldn't have done that. So yes, it's a big combination of of people and plans and opportunities. So I've had a full life. I'm lucky.
So Sherri, what's the best piece of advice you could give to aspiring women or to men? A lot of men watch this wonderful story and this wonderful show. So what's the best piece of advice you could give to people?
Well, for me, it's sort of dream big and don't give up. So to me, that's been kind of a mantra of everything that I've done. Is when you're dreaming big, and you're working on really big problems that have an important impact, when you hit the stumbles along the road, it gives you the motivation to keep going, because what you're working on is important enough to tolerate that and to persevere. So that's been a big motivator for me. And I guess, a big thing I've also learned in my life is to always have a plan, but keep your eyes open for opportunities, so those have helped me anyway.
We just want to say thank you for a truly wonderful conversation. And Sherri, good luck on Particles for Humanity. The impact that you will have on so many lives is just incredible.
Well,
so thank you so much for today.
Well, thanks for having me. It's great to be with you again, Sandi. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, Sherri.